The twin suns of the Zirian system cast their dying light across the mining colony as massive bioorganic ships descended from the void like hungry predators. The creatures were alive, their hulls pulsing with veins that glowed sickly green, tentacles writhing from their undersides as they approached the small world below. Administrator Kael'Von pressed his 4 hands against the reinforced windows of the command center, watching in growing terror as the Kythera swarm tore through their orbital defense platforms. Each platform that died sent brilliant flashes across the darkness, but the alien ships barely slowed. They absorbed the energy from the explosions, growing larger and more hungry with each meal. "How many are there?" asked his assistant, a young Corellian whose blue skin had turned pale with fear. Kael'Von checked the sensors again, hoping the numbers were wrong. They were not. Over 1,000 ships. Maybe more arriving every hour. The Kythera were known throughout the galaxy as the ultimate threat. They consumed entire worlds, breaking down all organic matter to feed their endless hunger. No species had ever successfully fought them off when they came in such numbers. The best anyone could hope for was evacuation, and even that rarely worked. "Sir, the mining platforms in Sector 7 have gone dark," reported Lieutenant Vextar from his station. "They are starting to feed on the colony infrastructure." Kael'Von closed his eyes for a moment. 40,000 beings lived on Zirian Prime. Miners, researchers, families who had made this distant world their home. All of them were about to become food for the swarm. "Send the distress signal on all coalition frequencies," he ordered, moving to the communication console. His 4 arms worked quickly, typing the emergency codes that would broadcast their message across known space. "Tell them we have 12 hours before complete overrun. Maybe less." The message went out immediately. "This is Zirian Prime Colony calling all coalition forces. We are under attack by Kythera swarm estimated at over 1,000 ships. Request immediate military assistance. Civilian population of 40,000 mixed species in immediate danger. Repeat, 40,000 civilians need evacuation or protection." They waited. In emergencies like this, the coalition had protocols. Battle fleets were supposed to respond within hours. Someone was supposed to come help. The first response came from the Altarian Defense Force, Zirian Prime. "This is Fleet Command. Our nearest battle group is engaged with Void Cult Raiders. Cannot break off. Estimated arrival time 72 hours. 72 hours. They would all be dead in 12. More responses came in quickly, each one bringing worse news. The Corellian Navy was fighting machine rebels in the Outer Rim. The Centauri fleet was protecting vital supply lines from pirates. The mighty Draconian Empire was dealing with civil war in their core systems. Everyone was too far away, too busy, or too scared to face the Kythera swarm. "Sir," said Vextar quietly, "should we begin evacuation procedures?" Kael'Von looked at the tactical display. The Kythera ships were spreading out around the planet like a net. Their bioships could move faster than any civilian transport. Even if they loaded every person onto every ship, most would die before reaching safe distance. "There is nowhere to run," he said simply. But far across the galaxy, in a small yellow star system that most species barely knew existed, the distress signal reached 3 ships that were different from anything the Coalition had ever seen. Captain Lee Hansol stood on the bridge of the UES Retribution, reading the emergency transmission that had just arrived. His ship was sleek and angular, built for war rather than exploration. The humans had only joined galactic civilization 5 years ago, but they had learned quickly that the universe was not a safe place. "Sir, we are receiving a distress call from something called Zirian Prime," reported his communication officer, a young woman named Kim Yujin. "They say they are under attack by the Kythera swarm." The bridge went quiet. Everyone had heard stories about the Kythera, even the newly arrived humans. They were the monsters that parents used to scare children across 100 worlds. "How far?" asked Hansol. 18 hours at maximum burn, answered his navigator, Park Minute-Wu. "Sir," said his tactical officer, Lieutenant Oh Jinho, looking worried. "The message says over 1,000 Kythera ships. We only have 12 vessels in our patrol group." Hansol studied the star charts on his display. Zirian Prime was far from any human territory. The people there were aliens, species that humans barely knew. It would be easy to ignore the call, to say they could not help. But 40,000 civilians were about to die. "Signal the fleet," Hansol ordered. "All ships set course for Zirian Prime. Maximum burn." "Sir," Oh Jinho said carefully, "it is 12 ships against 1,000. The odds are not good." Hansol looked at his crew, seeing the same mix of fear and determination on every face. These were good people, men and women who had volunteered to explore the dangerous galaxy and protect human interests. But now they were being asked to protect aliens they had never met, in a fight they could not possibly win. "Signal the other captains," Han Sol said calmly. "Tell them we have a rescue mission." "And Lieutenant?" "Yes, sir." Han Sol smiled, but it was not a pleasant expression. "Tell them that if we are outnumbered 1,000 to 12, then the Kithra will not expect what is coming." The 12 human ships turned toward Zirion Prime and accelerated into the darkness, carrying with them something the galaxy had never seen before and would soon learn to fear. 3 days had passed since the distress signal went out across the galaxy, and Zirion Prime was dying. The Kithra swarm had settled into orbit around the small mining world like vultures around a corpse. Their bioships pulsed with hungry life, tentacles reaching down through the atmosphere to taste the fear of the 40,000 beings trapped on the surface. Administrator Kael'Von had not slept in 72 hours. His 4 eyes were red and tired as he watched the tactical display in the command bunker deep beneath the colony's main city. The Kithra were being patient now, surrounding the planet completely. They knew their prey could not escape. "Sir, they are moving into final attack formation," reported Lieutenant Vextar, his voice barely above a whisper. Everyone spoke quietly now, as if the monsters in space might hear them. Kael'Von nodded slowly. He had sent messages to every family on the planet, telling them to stay in the deep shelters. It would not save them, but it might give them a few extra hours of life. The Kithra liked to feed slowly, savoring the terror of their victims. Suddenly, space itself seemed to twist and bend near the edge of the system. Energy readings spiked across all sensors as something tore through the fabric of reality itself. "Jump signatures," shouted Vextar, his voice filled with sudden hope. "Multiple contacts emerging from hyperspace." Kael'Von felt his heart racing. The coalition had come. Someone had managed to break free from their other battles to save them. He watched the sensors eagerly, waiting to see the familiar shapes of coalition dreadnoughts or battle cruisers. What emerged from the swirling energy was nothing like what he expected. 12 ships materialized in the darkness, but they were unlike any vessels in the known galaxy. They were sleek and angular, built like weapons rather than the rounded, peaceful designs favored by most civilized species. Their hulls were dark gray metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They looked hungry, predatory, dangerous. "What are those?" asked Vextar, staring at his display in confusion. Before Kael'Von could answer, a transmission crackled through the communication system. The voice spoke in broken galactic standard, with an accent that made the translation computers struggle to understand. "Zirion Prime, this is Captain Lee Han Sol of the Human Expeditionary Fleet. We received your distress call. Please maintain safe distance from combat zone." Kael'Von blinked all 4 eyes in confusion. "Human," he repeated, the word feeling strange in his mouth. His translator systems had never encountered that term before. "I do not understand. What species are you?" "We are from the Sol system," came the reply. "We are here to help." Kael'Von looked at his staff, seeing the same confusion on their faces. Sol system? None of them had heard of it. These must be from some distant part of the galaxy, perhaps beyond the outer rim where few civilized species traveled. "Unknown species," Kael'Von said carefully, "you face overwhelming odds. The Kithra swarm numbers over 1,000 ships. You have only 12. You should leave while you still can." There was a pause before the human captain replied. When he spoke again, his voice was calm and cold. "Understood. Beginning threat assessment." On his sensors, Kael'Von watched as the 12 strange ships moved into formation. But it was not like any formation he had ever seen. Coalition fleets formed defensive walls or protective screens. These ships arranged themselves like a pack of hunters, with the larger vessels in front and smaller ones moving to flank positions. The Kithra swarm noticed the newcomers immediately. 1,000 bioships began turning away from the planet, their attention drawn to this new source of food. The psychic screaming that filled subspace changed from lazy hunger to excited anticipation. Fresh meat had arrived, and it looked easy to catch. On the lead human ship, Lieutenant Park Minutho stared at his sensor readings in amazement. "Captain, these alien creatures are enormous. Some of them are over 5 kilometers long. Energy readings are off the charts." Captain Lee Han Sol stood calmly on his bridge, watching the tactical display as the Kithra ships moved toward them. His crew was nervous, he could see it in their faces, but they were ready. Humans did not run from fights, even impossible ones. "Analysis, Lieutenant O?" he asked his tactical officer. Lieutenant O Jinho studied his instruments carefully. They appear to be biological ships, sir. Living creatures rather than built vessels. No obvious weapons ports, but massive energy reserves. They seem to feed on other ships somehow. Han Sol nodded. He had read the reports about the Kythera during the journey to Zirion Prime. They were known as the ultimate predators, creatures that consumed entire civilizations. Most species ran when they arrived. Those that fought usually died quickly. But humans were not most species. Signal all ships, Han Sol ordered. Switch to Terran War Protocol. All civilian vessels maintain minimum safe distance of 50,000 kilometers. The words were broadcast on all frequencies, reaching not only the human fleet but also the survivors listening from Zirion Prime. Kael'Von and his staff heard the transmission clearly, though they did not understand what Terran War Protocol meant. Something in the tone sent a chill through everyone who heard it. The human captain had spoken those words like a death sentence, cold and final and absolutely certain. On the 12 human ships, crews that had seemed nervous moments before were now moving with deadly purpose. Weapon systems came online that the galaxy had never seen. Soldiers prepared equipment that would have horrified civilized species. And in the command centers, officers began planning something that would change how the entire galaxy thought about war forever. The Kythera swarm continued its approach, confident in their overwhelming numbers. They had consumed countless species over the millennia. These newcomers would be no different. They had never encountered humans before. The 12 human ships spread out across the darkness of space like wolves preparing to hunt. Administrator Kael'Von watched from his bunker on Zirion Prime, trying to understand what he was seeing on his tactical display. Every military manual in the galaxy taught the same basic formations, defensive walls where ships protected each other, or screening formations where smaller vessels shielded larger ones from attack. But these humans were doing something completely different. Their ships moved in aggressive patterns that looked almost primitive, like hunters surrounding prey rather than soldiers preparing for battle. The larger ships took point positions while smaller vessels moved to flanking positions, ready to strike from multiple angles at once. "What kind of formation is that?" whispered Lieutenant Vextar, staring at his sensors in confusion. Kael'Von had no answer. In all his years of military service, he had never seen anything like it. These humans fought like predators, not like the civilized species that made up the coalition. On the UES Vengeance, Captain Kim Soo-jin checked her ship's status one final time. Her vessel was sleek and deadly, built specifically for close combat rather than the long-range engagements preferred by most galactic navies. She opened a communication channel to coordinate with the other ships in the small fleet. "All vessels, this is Vengeance Actual," she said calmly. "Target assignment is as follows: we take the largest bioships first. Boarding teams prepare for insertion immediately after initial contact." The transmission was heard not only by the human fleet but also by the survivors on Zirion Prime. Kael'Von nearly dropped his communication device when he heard the word boarding. "Boarding?" he said, his voice cracking with disbelief. "Captain Kim, no civilized species attempts boarding actions against the Kythera. Their internal biology is specifically designed to dissolve any intruders. The acid in their corridors will kill your people in seconds." There was a pause before Captain Lee Hansol's voice came over the communication system. When he spoke, his tone was cold and matter-of-fact. "Administrator Kael'Von, we appreciate your concern. But we are not like other species." Something in the way he said those words made everyone who heard them feel afraid, though they could not explain why. The Kythera swarm was now close enough that their psychic screaming filled subspace with waves of hungry anticipation. The bioships were enormous, some of them over 5 kilometers long, their living hulls pulsing with veins that glowed green in the darkness. Tentacles writhed beneath their bodies like the arms of giant squids, reaching out to taste the fear of their new prey. Captain Han Sol had tried to follow standard coalition protocols for first contact with hostile species. He had broadcast peace messages in 17 different languages, offered to negotiate, even warned the Kythera that they were interfering with civilian populations. The creatures responded to every diplomatic attempt with the same thing, hungry screeching that roughly translated to food, food, food in every language scanner the humans possessed. On the bridge of the UES Retribution, Commander Choi Hyjin monitored the approaching bioships while trying one last time to establish communication. "Sir, they are not responding to standard coalition peace protocols. I have tried everything: ceasefire requests, territorial boundary offers, even tribute negotiations. They only respond with feeding calls." Han Sol studied the tactical display, watching as 1,000 bioships moved toward his small fleet like a green tide of death. Each ship was easily 10 times larger than his vessels, and there were 1,000 of them against his 12. Any civilized species would retreat now, or at least try to find a diplomatic solution. But the Kithra had made their intentions clear. They wanted to feed on the 40,000 civilians trapped on Zirian Prime. And they saw the human fleet as nothing more than an appetizer. "Then we respond in kind," Han Sol said, his voice carrying an edge that made even his own experienced crew feel uncomfortable. "All ships, weapons free. Show them what happens when you threaten civilians." The change in the human fleet was immediate and terrifying. What had seemed like a small, desperate relief force suddenly transformed into something else entirely. The ships moved with new purpose, their formations shifting from cautious to aggressive. Weapon systems came online that registered energy signatures unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. On Zirian Prime, Kael'Von watched his senses in growing amazement and fear. "By the ancient gods," he whispered, "what are those energy readings?" The human ships were powering up weapons that seemed to bend the laws of physics. Not the clean energy beams used by civilized species, but something rougher and more brutal. His sensors detected massive kinetic accelerators, weapons that fired physical projectiles rather than energy. There were fusion warheads that would turn anything they hit into expanding plasma. And strangest of all, he detected what looked like boarding craft equipped with flamethrowers. "Sir," said Vextar, his voice shaking, "I think we may have made a mistake calling for help." The Kithara bioships sensed the change in their prey as well. The psychic screaming in subspace shifted from hungry anticipation to something that might have been confusion. These small ships were not running away as expected. Instead, they were moving closer, accelerating toward the swarm rather than away from it. For the first time in their species' long history of consumption, the Kithara encountered something they did not understand. Their prey was acting like predators. On 12 human ships, crews that had seemed nervous minutes before were now moving with deadly efficiency. Soldiers checked weapons that would have horrified civilized species. Engineers armed devices that had been banned by every galactic treaty. And in the command centers, officers prepared to show the galaxy what humans meant when they said they were there to help. The battle for Zirian Prime was about to begin, and neither the Kithara nor the galaxy itself was prepared for what was coming. What happened next broke every rule of warfare that civilized species had followed for thousands of years. The human ships did not stop at the safe distance that coalition forces always maintained during battle. Instead of firing their weapons from far away like sensible beings, they accelerated directly toward the massive Kithara bioships. Their sleek vessels weaved between writhing tentacles that were each larger than entire human ships, moving with a precision that seemed impossible. Administrator Kael'Von watched his tactical display in growing horror. "They are flying directly into the swarm," he whispered. "No species fights at such close range. They will be torn apart." But the humans were not torn apart. They were doing something far worse. Weapons that the galaxy had only heard about in ancient legends erupted from the human vessels. Kinetic accelerators, crude weapons that fired chunks of metal at incredible speeds, punched through bioarmor that had protected the Kithara for millions of years. The projectiles did not simply damage the living ships, they tore massive holes completely through them, sending green blood spraying into the vacuum of space. Captain Kim Soo-jin coordinated the attack from her position on the UES Vengeance, her voice calm and professional as she watched thousand-year-old bioships dying around her. "Target their feeding organs first. Once they cannot regenerate, finish them with fusion torpedoes." Fusion torpedoes. Weapons that most civilized species had banned centuries ago because they were too brutal for warfare. The humans fired them without hesitation, and each impact turned entire sections of Kithara bioships into expanding clouds of superheated plasma. But the most terrifying sight was yet to come. Small craft detached themselves from the human ships and flew directly toward the wounded bioships. At first, Kael'Von thought they might be escape pods or damaged fighters trying to retreat. Then he realized the truth that made his hearts stop beating for several seconds. They were boarding craft. The humans were actually trying to get inside the Kithara ships. "This is madness," he said to his staff. "The interior of a Kithara bioship is designed to kill intruders instantly. The walls secrete acid that can dissolve any known material. The air itself is poisonous to most life forms." But the small human craft punched through the bioarmor anyway, drilling into the living ships like parasites. What emerged from those craft defied everything the galaxy knew about intelligent life. Sergeant O. Dongwook stepped out of his boarding craft and into a nightmare. The corridor around him was alive, its walls pulsing with veins and dripping with acid that hissed when it hit the deck. The air was thick with poisonous gases that would kill most species in seconds. Behind him, 20 human marines followed, their faces hidden behind masks that made them look like demons. "Flamethrowers to the front," he ordered calmly, as if he were discussing the weather instead of preparing to fight inside a living creature. "Remember your training. These things can regenerate from almost any wound. Keep burning until there is nothing left but ash." The Kithara had designed their ships to be perfect traps. Any creature that entered would be dissolved by acid, poisoned by toxic air, or driven insane by psychic screaming that could shatter minds. For millions of years, no species had ever successfully boarded a Kithara vessel and survived. But humans, as they had already proven, were not like other species. AudioBook led his soldiers through passages that tried to digest them, calmly burning everything that moved with weapons that turned living tissue into charcoal. When acid dripped on their armor, they ignored it. When poisonous gas filled the corridors, they kept breathing through their filters. When psychic screams tried to drive them insane, they responded by screaming back, but their screams carried something the Kithara had never heard before: joy. The humans were enjoying this. The biocorridors writhed in agony as flamethrowers reduced regenerating tissue to smoking ash. Defensive organisms that had never failed before melted under weapons that burned hotter than stars. And through it all, the human soldiers advanced with methodical precision, killing everything they found with an efficiency that would have impressed machines. Captain Li Jiwu watched the battle from her command chair aboard the UES Retribution, coordinating the movements of 12 ships as they systematically destroyed a force that had terrorized the galaxy for generations. Her voice remained calm and professional as she gave orders that resulted in the death of creatures older than human civilization. Vengeance, focus your fire on the breeding chambers. Defiance, target their command organisms. Fury, prepare for boarding action on the flagship. On Zirion Prime, the survivors watched their senses in stunned silence. Bioships that had seemed invincible hours before were now drifting hulks, their green blood forming clouds in space. Some were still alive but crippled, their tentacles cut away by kinetic weapons. Others had been completely gutted by fusion torpedoes, their interiors turned to plasma. And inside the ships that still lived, human soldiers continued their methodical work of extermination. They moved through living corridors like a plague, burning everything behind them until only empty, dead passages remained. Lieutenant Vextar stared at his display, trying to understand what he was seeing. "Sir, the readings show that the humans are winning. Against 1,000 Kithara ships, 12 human vessels are winning." The battle lasted 4 hours. When it ended, the silence that followed was more frightening than all the weapons fire that had come before. 1,000 bioships that had arrived to feed on Zirion Prime now drifted as lifeless debris. Some had been blown apart by fusion weapons. Others had been gutted by boarding parties. All of them were dead. The humans had not lost a single ship. 6 months after the destruction of the Kithara swarm, the galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. What the news services called the Zirion incident had spread across civilized space like wildfire, carried by survivors who spoke in whispers about ships that fought like demons and soldiers who smiled while walking through acid-filled corridors. The Great Council chambers on Centauri Prime had seen many debates over the centuries, but nothing like the hushed, fearful discussions that now took place whenever the subject of humans arose. Representatives from dozens of species gathered in the vast circular room, their voices kept deliberately low as if speaking too loudly might somehow summon the terrifying newcomers. Councillor Vel9, an elderly Altarian whose forearms shook slightly as he spoke, stood to address the assembly. "My fellow representatives, we cannot ignore the facts. The humans saved 40,000 innocent civilians on Zirion Prime. Without their intervention, that world would now be nothing but dead rock stripped bare by the Kithara." A hiss of disagreement came from the Serpentine delegation. Representative Korthal raised his scaled head, his yellow eyes glowing with fear and anger. "At what cost, Councillor? Have any of you actually watched the battle recordings? I have seen them all, frame by frame. These humans do not fight like civilized beings. They fight like the swarm itself, but with intelligence. With planning. With joy." The word joy hung in the air like a curse. Everyone in the chamber had heard the stories. Human soldiers who laughed while fighting through bioship corridors. Human captains who smiled when ordering the destruction of thousand-year-old creatures. A species that seemed to take pleasure in the very brutality that other beings found horrifying. "They boarded Kithara vessels," whispered Representative Zixtal from the Crystalline Empire. "No species has ever successfully boarded a Kithara ship and lived. These humans did not just live, they cleared them out room by room, burning everything they found." In the human delegation section, a small area that had been hastily added to accommodate the galaxy's newest members, Ambassador Park So-young sat quietly and listened. She was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile, the sort of person you might meet in any peaceful city on any civilized world. It was impossible to imagine her commanding the terrible weapons that had annihilated the Kythera swarm. But she was human, and that was enough to make every other being in the chamber nervous. The debate continued for hours, with speaker after speaker rising to express the same fears in different ways. The humans were too dangerous. Their methods were too brutal. Their weapons were too terrible. They fought like monsters, even if they saved lives while doing it. Finally, the council president called for Ambassador Park to address the assembly. She stood slowly, smoothing her simple blue dress, and walked to the center of the chamber. When she spoke, her voice was calm and pleasant, like a teacher explaining a simple lesson to children. "Honored representatives," she began, "I understand your concerns. The galaxy is indeed a dangerous place, filled with many threats. The Kythera swarm was only one of them. We humans have encountered others in our brief time among the stars, the void cult that seeks to end all life, the machine hegemony that wishes to convert all organic beings to metal, the raiders from the dark nebula who take slaves and destroy worlds for sport." She paused, letting her words sink in. Every species in the chamber had lost worlds to one or more of these threats. "We offer our protection freely to all peaceful species," she continued. "We ask for nothing in return except the chance to trade and learn from your cultures. We do not seek territory or tribute or submission. We only want to help." Councillor Velnine leaned forward in his chair. "And if we decline this protection, Ambassador? What then?" Park So-young's expression remained pleasant, but something flickered behind her eyes for just a moment, something that reminded everyone watching that this gentle-looking woman represented a species that had destroyed 1,000 Kythera bioships without losing a single vessel. "Then you face your enemies alone, as you did before we arrived," she said simply. "We will not force our help on anyone. That would make us no better than the threats we fight against." The implications of her words settled over the chamber like a heavy blanket. Across the galaxy, new crises were emerging every day. The void cult had been spotted in 3 different sectors. Machine hegemony scouts were probing the outer rim. Dark nebula raiders had destroyed 2 entire colonies just last week. And each time these threats appeared, the same terrible question arose in the minds of every civilized leader: do we call the humans? As the council session ended and representatives filed out in small, nervous groups, reports began arriving from across known space. Human peacekeeping fleets were deploying to 17 different crisis zones. Each fleet carried the same message that had both saved Zirion Prime and terrified the galaxy ever since. "Don't worry. We're here to help." The message was broadcast in dozens of languages, always delivered in the same calm, friendly tone that made it sound like a promise rather than a threat. But every species that heard it remembered the Zirion incident, and they wondered if the humans truly understood the difference. On distant worlds where other threats gathered in the darkness, predators that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries began to hear whispers about the newcomers from Sol. Stories spread about ships that fought without fear and soldiers who treated war like a game they enjoyed winning. The galaxy had gained protectors who were more frightening than the monsters they fought, and no one could decide which was worse, facing the darkness alone, or having guardian angels who smiled while they killed. In the depths of space, 12 human ships patrolled the trade routes, and their crews hummed cheerful songs as they cleaned weapons that could reduce bioships to ash. They were there to help, just as they had promised, and they would continue helping whether the galaxy wanted them to or not.